Thank you all very much for joining us today. Good morning. Good morning, all. My name is David Schlesinger. I'm the editor-in-chief of Reuters, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session on the next emerging markets to emerge. So what happens after the BRICs? We have a very fine panel this morning to help us with this question. On my far left is the Minister of Finance of Nigeria, Mr. Usman. Then we have Mr. Kojima, who is head of Mitsubishi Corporation. Mr. Hai, the Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam. Mr. Gurría, the Secretary General of the OECD. And Mr. Gref, the head of Sberbank from Russia. It's a very interesting question at this particular time. I think a few months ago, everybody was waiting for the next emerging markets to emerge, and everyone was very confident that they would emerge. But of course, right now, the next 11 countries and the frontier countries, they face huge challenges as the developed world starts slipping and sliding into slowdown, if not into full recession. Where will investors' attention go? What kind of liquidity will there be? We have to think about liquidity, we have to think about risk appetite, we have to think crucially about commodity prices. Are these going to be as supportive as they were looking just a few months ago? It's very important for the emerging markets to stay flexible. It's very important for the emerging markets, I believe, to differentiate themselves. Most people, for example, think that Turkey might weather the storm better than Romania. Both countries have large current account deficits, but Turkey's government and central bank have been praised by analysts for their quality of policymaking, while the opposite is true of Romania. The latter relies on portfolio cash to finance its deficit, while Turkey gets large amounts of direct investment. Portfolio investments, as we know, tend to dry up first of all when there is any kind of risk aversion. But what is the size of the prize? Why is this so important? Well, the BRIC countries, of course, give us the model. In 10 years, from 1996, the combined GDP of Brazil, Russia, India, and China went from being about the same size as the United States to nearly one-third larger in just a decade. Now, with US growth slowing, people in the smaller emerging markets are looking to the BRICs to pick up the slack. But will they be able to? In this next wave, the N11, and then the frontier markets, the emerging markets, they're still in their infancy, but everyone has been hoping that they will grow in strength. Now, there's great overlap in the two lists, the N11 and the emerging markets. The N11 consists of Turkey, Vietnam, Egypt, Indonesia, Pakistan, Nigeria, Korea, Mexico, Philippines, Iran, and Bangladesh. That's 7% of the world economy and 9% of its population. The frontier markets, well, since 2000, their markets have returned some 24% on average a year versus 12% for more mainstream emerging markets. These frontier markets include a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa and the CIS and the Balkans, but they're so much smaller than the BRICs and even the next generation markets. So there's really a question about how resilient they can be and how vulnerable they will be to any kind of slowdown. Many of them are highly reliant on exports, especially of commodities. And unlike the BRICs, they don't have the domestic stimulus that could make up for a softer world economy. So we have a decoupling story, we have a differentiation story, and we have very much a commodities story. How will these countries manage to weather the storm? So let's start first with Vietnam. Deputy Prime Minister Hai, is it too late? Did the emerging markets miss a chance to really come out? And will this next period be very difficult for you?
Well, I would suppose that Vietnam have performed quite well for the last number of years, and you know we averaged about 7.5% for the last 20 years, and last year it was 8.5%. The growth of the exports was something like 21.5%. However, we see that although for the last number of years ASEAN countries is trying to improve the trade amongst ASEAN countries and to try to reduce the dependencies into the U.S. markets and others, but we still fears of the impact of the recession, if any, you know, from the U.S. for next year to come.
I should have mentioned at the beginning that this session is on the record, so everyone here is prepared to be quoted and photographed as a result of this session. So it is on the record. Could I go next to Mr. Sama? How does Nigeria see the coming period? Are you very worried about a slowdown? Do you think that you can differentiate yourself enough to make a difference?
I think Nigeria can differentiate itself because we have a lot going for us. As you pointed out correctly, we're in the next 11. We have achieved rapid growth, 6 to 7%. We're achieving that level of growth. Inflation is down. The exchange rate has been stabilized. The financial sector reforms and restructuring. Today we have probably the strongest and the fastest growing financial sector in Africa. And most importantly, we have a very strong domestic market. I think when you are talking about what is the competitive advantage, that emphasis on growth, and I think anybody that knows the market of these potential markets knows that the level of returns that are realized in Nigeria probably are not realized anywhere else today. And I'm sure there are quite a number of fund managers who know what I'm talking about. Returns in the range of 20 to 30% in our very booming capital market. So on the whole, I think Nigeria believes that, in fact, when you are hesitant about investing your funds in the US and other places, come over to Nigeria. It's a very safe place to put your money.
Thank you for that. May I turn to Mr. Gref now? You, of course, have had 7 years of experience as Minister of Economic Development and Trade of the Russian Federation before going into the bank as Chief Executive Officer. What are the lessons that you think the BRICs have to teach to the emerging markets? How do you see the role of the BRICs now as some of the developing world are slowing down?
How much time? 2 minutes.
To start.
Excuse me, my colleagues, I will be speaking in Russian. My English is not so good for this discussion. In 2 minutes, it's a very big problem to formulate my opinion about this problem. Я должен сказать, о том, что страны БРИК – это не механистическое сочетание, которое эксперты Goldman Sachs придумали. И я готов это доказать на цифрах. Страны БРИК – это 4 страны, которые войдут к 2050 году в первую пятерку, максимум 6 стран мира. По прогнозу Goldman Sachs в 50 году первая экономика мира Китай, вторая Соединенные Штаты Америки, третья Япония, четвертая Индия и пятая Россия. И тенденция, которую мы видим за последние 7 лет, это подтверждает. Доля 4 стран БРИК в мировом ВВП выросла в 2,5 раза. В 2000 году доля 4 стран ВВП была 5%, в 2007 году 13%. Объем золотовалютных резервов в этих странах вырос в 10 раз за 7 лет. 2000 год. Объем золотовалютных резервов 4 стран составлял 256 миллиардов долларов. Сейчас 2,5 триллиона долларов. Доля стран БРИК, компаний стран БРИК в мировом IPO в 2000 году составлял 6%. В 2007 году 33%. Или 80% от всех развивающихся рынков. Эти цифры можно продолжать иллюстрировать то, что я вам сейчас хочу сказать. А хочу я сказать, что динамика этих 4 стран, а также стран таких как Вьетнам, в исламском мире, Иран, Нигерия в Африке, будет опережать темпы роста развитых стран. Вопрос, хорошо это или плохо? И что в связи с этим надо делать? Нужно ли этого бояться? Нужно ли это поддерживать? Первое, на мой взгляд, это нужно осознать. Этого не надо бояться, это будет происходить вне зависимости от нашего с вами сознания. Хорошо это или плохо? На мой взгляд, абсолютно хорошо. Это даст устойчивость мировой экономике. Мы видим, как неделю назад глобальный кризис потряс все рынки мира. Это негативное влияние глобализации. Но позитивное влияние глобализации, что этот кризис был коротким по времени, быстро восстановился, и я не верю в глобальную и длинную рецессию. Уже с сегодняшним влиянием этих стран в мировой экономике кризис в Соединенных Штатах Америки не будет длинным. Глобальная экономика поможет преодолеть кризисное явление быстро. И последний тезис, что нам в связи с этим делать? Yes. 1 minute. Есть 2 модели поведения. Развитые страны будут устраивать барьеры на пути интеграции развивающихся стран в сложившиеся мировые, в том числе экономические институты. И тогда развивающиеся страны вынуждены будут выстраивать альтернативную систему своего влияния на те процессы, которые происходят в мире. Второй вариант – это интеграция развивающихся стран сообразно выросшему их потенциалу и влиянию в мировые институты. То есть признание сложившихся пропорций в мире. И в этом смысле мировая экономика получит новый толчок для развития по одинаковым для всех правилам игры. Не будет протекционизма, не будет таких огромных государственных фондов поддержки экономики, будут равные условия конкуренции для всех агентов. И я думаю, что нужно обсуждать именно эти проблемы и вопросы интеграции. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Mr. Gurría now, because I think I would like to have your comment on this rather optimistic view of things. How do you view the whole coupling, decoupling story and the chance for the world to have the happy ending that we just heard about?
I think that this decoupling story has been taken too far. If there's a slowdown in the OECD countries, there will be a slowdown in the rest of the world, period. But it is true that some countries are more vulnerable than others. It'll depend on the degree to which they trade. But the ways in which this transmission belt happens is not just trade. It's also investment. It's also through the financial system. And it's also through the mood. If the mood is somber, and if there is a bad feeling about the future, and if we all feel tomorrow is going to be worse than yesterday, then decisions are not going to be taken. The buyers will say, I'll wait until the market goes down a little more. The sellers will say the market is too cheap, I won't sell. And the investors will say, I don't know if by the time I'm in line with my first product, it's going to be in a bear market or a bull market, or growth or not growth. I might as well wait. And this is what is happening. And this affects everybody in the whole of the world. So yes, you may have your own sources of growth. The decoupling may be greater in these very fast-growing success stories like Russia and China and India and Vietnam, etc. But effectively, we will all be affected. Therefore, we should all contribute to the solution. We should have much better cooperation. We should have much better coordination. The G8 should become G13 as soon as we can, and we can call it G whatever you want, but they should all work together. The G8 cannot solve any problems without the 5, and the 5 cannot solve any problems without the 8. So why wait?
Thank you for that. Let's bring in Mr. Kojima as president of Mitsubishi. Japanese industry has always been in the forefront of looking out for opportunities and looking in the developing world for opportunities. So number one, are you waiting or are you still being aggressive at this time? And how are you finding the opportunities?
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. And I'd like to explain what our company is doing. And our company has over 220 offices in the world, in 80 countries. Therefore, almost, say, every month, I'll be traveling so many countries. And I like to see by myself the change of those countries. And frankly speaking, these days, the change of the development speed is very quick. And I myself is very optimistic for the future. And also, I like to tell you about from which viewpoint I am looking those countries, particularly next emerging countries. And there are 3 points. Number one is the resources. Resources means, of course, natural resources, means energy resources, metal resources, and also human resources. This is very important, viewpoint. Number 2 is the economy in that country. This means infrastructure, and also this infrastructure means the roads and railways and the harbor facility and the industrial park and so forth. And also economic growth and GDP growth rate. Also, this is very interesting for us. And also industries existing or the basis for the manufacturing. And even though those countries may have some resources, they cannot make use of those resources by themselves. They may have to ask somebody to do it. But gradually, those countries to make use of those resources by themselves, this is very valuable. And number 3 is the government leadership and political stability and commitment to economic development and open trade policy and compliance issues and security. From those 3 viewpoints, I am always checking what will be happening. Then every country, particularly BRICs and the following 11 countries, and I believe they are developing, very steadily. That is our impression. And yesterday, I attended the meeting, that is the Energy Summit. And the president of Nigeria, and his speech was excellent. He decided to restructure the government and the national oil company and so forth. I was very much impressed. And that is the part of the so-called political leadership. This is very, very important. In that sense, those countries are developing gradually. The speed itself is a bit, different. But I myself is very much optimistic of those countries.
Mr. Hai, how do you pick up on the point about government leadership? What are you within the government of Vietnam trying to do to show that leadership?
Well, I would fully agree with Mr. Kojima's opinion. The stability, the political stability is quite a very important issue for the emerging countries in order to be success and in order to grasp the opportunities and overcome all the risks that it might happen. So in the case of Vietnam, you know, three issues we're considering the important for the success in the future. One is the political sort of stability. The second one is to do with the equality and the you know, the resolval of the social problems. And the third one is to protect the environment, especially during the very quick development process. For the last number of years, we were attracting quite a number of foreign direct investment. Last year was $20 billion, and the majority of that is coming into the industries and also the services sectors. And we believe that with that sort of participation of the foreign direct investment and also indirect investment as well, you know, the economy will continue to pick up. And the government is quite committed to the success of the FDI investment. So we reform our administrative system. We continue to improve our institution system. We continue to equitize our state-owned enterprises, which is now, you know, remaining about 2,700 state-owned enterprises. It's coming down from the figure of 1,200,000. So it supplies more, you know, sort of capital to the market and more room for the private sectors to come into the markets and together with the government to develop the countries.
Thank you. I think we should turn to the audience to find out what is on your mind and what questions you have for our panelists. So the first question is over here. Please identify yourself. When you... Do we have microphones for people? Actually, shout. We'll hear you. Just shout. I'll repeat the question. If they don't have microphones, I'll repeat the question so they hear it. Okay, the question to the panel is, can you be specific about who is going to emerge next, with due regard for national chauvinism? But why don't we start with Mr. Gref first? What beyond the BRICS? Who's going to emerge next?
Я думаю, что БРИКС будет оставаться на сцене долго, и это, безусловно, страны-лидеры. Если говорить о регионах, то достаточно хорошие позиции у Южноафриканской республики и Нигерии в Африке, Аргентины и Мексики в Америке, большой потенциал у ближневосточных стран, в частности у Ирана среди мусульманских стран. Конечно же, таким странам нужно отнести и Вьетнам. И по составу населения, по объему населения и по наличию ресурсов достаточно для развития. Все будет определяться понятием leadership. Насколько эффективна будет стратегия этих стран. И в конечном итоге ничто не помешает им ворваться там, в шестерку или в восьмерку лидеров. И мы все больше будем наблюдать компании из этих стран, которые будут вырываться на мировую арену. Вот судя по тому, Давид, как вы выговаривали слово «Сбербанк», я понял, что вам проще выговорить «Ситибанк» или «Goldman Sachs». Я очень люблю эти банки. 5 лет назад Сбербанк не входил в сотню банков. Сегодня Сбербанк – это банк в первой десятке банков мира. Так же, как мы с трудом выговаривали еще несколько лет назад название ICBC, а сегодня это банк, который вышел на лидерские позиции в мире. все больше и больше будет таких новостей с рынков развивающихся стран. И мне кажется, что очень важно не какое количество стран и кто именно выйдет на эти позиции. Важна интегрирующая позиция эти страны в общемировые процессы, дающие кумулятивный эффект для всех.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Gurría, who is your candidate to emerge?
Well, first of all, it's not BRIC, it's BRICSAM. That's includes South Africa and Mexico. So we leave these on the side. South Africa is in every list, and they're on our enhanced engagement list, and they're getting invited to the G8 just like Mexico. So I'd say, and then they tell us we shouldn't talk about Vietnam and Nigeria. Of course, they are in our list.
We'll take them as written.
And for the ones that are not here, Colombia and Latin America, if we can't praise Vietnam because they're already here, so I'd say there, Malaysia. Although, again, Malaysia is sometimes considered as having already arrived, you know. Egypt in the Middle East and North Africa region, just mentioning one. And I already mentioned South Africa and Nigeria in Africa. But so I'd stay with those two in that region. So these are the ones that I'd say are the ones that are already pointing, already being looked at, and already having the flows, already having the relationships, already plugged in, and therefore pretty close. I just hope that those first 5 or 6 that Mr. Gref was talking about move in faster so that they leave the space for the newcomers to sit at the table.
Right. So, Mr. Hoang, who's your big competitor? Who do you worry about emerging?
Well, I believe on the ASEAN for the next number of years with the size of their populations and the contribution they give for the world in terms of trade and export. And also you look back to last year, you know, and before last year, their performance was quite good with 6.5% and forecasted to be about 8% this year. So I still believe with that.
Thank you. Mr. Kojima, who is emerging?
This is a very difficult question anyhow. And who will be the following those BRICs? And maybe it might be included in the BRICs. Huh? And in that case, say, I'm just thinking about Vietnamese and also Turkey. And Mexico is also yes. And there are so many others. And as I told you, I'm very much optimistic. Those, you know, emerging countries. Whenever I visit there, they developed a lot. Therefore, it's very hard, actually, to mention only one country who will be following the BRICs.
Right. Mr. Usama?
Well, for me, I think there are probably about 4 points that you need to take into account in answering this question. First of all, which countries have the great growth potential? Secondly, which are those that are doing the necessary reforms, macro, structural, institutional, and other, that are important in terms of getting the economies to be the top leading economies in the world? The third one is political leadership. Again, which countries are exhibiting great political leadership? Leaders that are committed, that believe in the future of the countries. And lastly, which point probably hasn't come out, is a people that believe that they can actually do these things themselves without, whether the other parties come in, it's a help if they come. But even if they don't come, we are gearing up to transform ourselves. And if you take all of these factors into account, I think like our Russian colleague here mentioned, there are about 10 banks in Nigeria. If I mention Zenith Bank, for example, many of you don't know about it. You may have seen its advertisement on the CNN. But these are names also that, given what is happening in Nigeria, that are very soon going to become household names internationally. They are moving, they are growing, and they are really getting out of Nigeria into Africa, into the rest of. So net, I think my vote is Nigeria.
All right, there's a question in the front. We actually have a microphone for you now.
And Gilberto Marin from Mexico, and I would like if Mr. Gurría could elaborate a little bit more about, of course, Mexico and Brazil, especially because these two countries, they are putting in place a huge infrastructure program. So I would like to, if Mr. Gurría can elaborate too, and also I would like the opinion of Mr. Kojima. Thank you.
Remember what the question was about. It's not the BRICs, okay? And I said, well, not the BRIC. I added S for South Africa and the M for Mexico. Mexico is a member of the OECD. Brazil is already taken into account. They all are invited to the G8 meetings, etc. So I'm talking here about breakthroughs. I'm talking here about the new kids on the block. You know, Mexico and Brazil are already on their way, if you will. They got to do things right and they got to do their own homework. But I'm not discussing about them now. It's not the intermediates that we're talking about here. I'm talking about, you know, Mr. Uribe is walking around someplace from Colombia. They're doing a hell of a job in terms of the policies. They have some problems to address, but you know, Vietnam, from our point of view, Vietnam was just asked to join the development center of the OECD. You know, so that they're plugging in, they're reaching out, and they're getting $20 billion of foreign investment, which helps. You know, it puts you on the map. It's and in the case of Nigeria, they say because we have so many things to offer to foreign investors, and a lot of oil too, you know, and that helps. But then what happens? There are governance issues related to the image of Nigeria. And what happens with the president who's 8 months in office? Yesterday, we spent the whole dinner, or rather the night before, discussing, and he was leading a discussion about anti-corruption. And we, who are the depositories of the Anti-Corruption Convention, there we were talking, and the posse, Mr. Buchmann, who leads 130 private sector of the largest companies in the world, fighting corruption for cross-border business. They were talking to the president of Nigeria about how to reduce corruption, how to fight corruption in Nigeria and in other developing countries. So they are addressing these important issues. You have size matters, population, natural resources endowment, but clearly the governance issues are just as important in terms of attracting those investments and future growth.
Thank you. There's a question in the back, the man with the beard.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre Lehmann, IMD. Two questions. One, what about Ukraine, Pakistan, and particularly Ukraine addressed to Mr. Gref? Second question is, what about some surprises? I mean, most of the countries that you've been mentioning are ones which I think most of us have on our radars. Can you think of countries that are not on our radars that could be surprises as emerging, the next emerging markets, say, in 5-6 years?
Great. Let's start with the Ukraine question.
Украина очень высокопотенциальная страна. Обладает всеми необходимыми ресурсами для развития. Получилось так, что это молодое государство, у которого длительное время не было самостоятельной политической культуры и самостоятельной государственной власти. И сейчас во многом процессы экономического развития Украины тормозят происходящие там сложные политические процессы. Если произойдет политическая стабилизация на Украине, то эта страна вполне может претендовать на роль одного из 10 мировых лидеров по темпам экономического роста среди развивающихся стран. Но я бы хотел сказать еще об одной отличительной черте развивающихся стран, которые показывают высокие темпы роста. Я недавно был в Вьетнаме. Ходил по улицам, смотрел на людей, что поражает. Огромное количество молодежи и взгляд этих людей. Знаете, как в любой компании, как в любой фирме, философия фирмы является определяющей, и носители этой философии фирмы являются определяющими в ее успехах. Так вот там люди с горящими глазами, которые хотят стать лидерами, они стремятся достичь высоких успехов, и мне кажется, там, где больше горят глаза у людей, будь то Вьетнам, где это очень видно на улицах, Пакистан или Украина, эти страны станут лидерами. Вопрос времени.
Thank you. Let's go to the surprise part of the question. I want to start with you because I let you get away with mentioning Nigeria, your own country, before, but now you have to mention a surprise that is not Nigeria. Who should we be surprised by?
Well, I think the point really is this point about people who believe. You know, the BRIC countries, they've got to where they are because of that commitment by their own people to get themselves out of a particular situation and grow their economies and do the right kinds of things. So for me, there are a number of possibilities, but the critical points are going to be not only doing the right things, but also the belief, like he said, those shining eyes that you see, the can-do spirit, the fact that we're willing to do it irrespective of. Somebody talked about, I don't want to go back to Nigeria again, but the growth in Nigeria, for example, has been more due, in fact, less due to what is happening.
No one can question your belief. That's
in the oil sector. No, and less to do with what is happening in the oil sector, because in fact the oil sector is growing negatively, and the Niger Delta issues and so on. But it is the way that these issues are being addressed, I think, that really will become critical. And for me, when I look at countries, what I am also looking for is that young, vibrant leadership, belief in the ability to do things themselves, to get things right, and to take the country to a much higher level. And therefore, I think, for me, I don't want to be very specific about any particular country, but I look more at these characteristics. And for me, that, in fact, is the most important element in deciding which country is going to be among the next 11 or 12 or whatever number.
You wanted to say something on this?
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, that there's some things that are taken as given. We are now negotiating accession for Russia. Mr. Gref was one of the architects of this process. For Chile, and I'm not saying Chile is up and coming. They're there. They're admirable. They're doing, you know, things very well. Their policies are up the best in the world, and this is why they're coming into the OECD. So I'm not saying that they're up and coming because everybody has noticed them. This is why I didn't talk about Turkey. Somebody mentioned here about Turkey. Turkey is in the same situation. Turkey is doing, you know, with this discussion about going into the EU, they've done all their changes. Ali Babajan was saying, I think we've done 314 out of the 316 changes. Eventually, it doesn't even matter whether they join the EU or not. If they do the changes, they're enjoying the consequences of the changes. So what really up and coming, really new names, surprising names that we haven't talked about, well, you can't be totally surprised. But, for example, Israel is also, by the way, a candidate for accession in the case of the EU, together with Estonia and Slovenia. But new names we haven't mentioned, Costa Rica in the case of Latin America. And I'd make big emphasis in the case of Egypt, again, not because it's not on the radar screen, but if a country in 5 years goes from having $500 million to $10 billion of foreign direct investment, and with very dramatic changes in the governance, very dramatic changes in the decision-making process and the quality of the politics, those countries get into the radar screen by themselves. Nobody has to propose them. And this is what is happening. We just had this Middle East and North Africa conference a few weeks ago in Cairo, and it was impressive. The region is making headway. And there's Jordan, and there's Morocco, and there's South Africa. Everybody's getting on the bandwagon of these changes. It's a region which is sometimes we don't have in our radar screen as much, and they're making impressive progress.
Thank you. We have a question in the third row.
I'm interested to have the opinion of Mr. Gref and Carrera of investing in real estate in Serbia. And especially I ask for real estate because you can't take them with you when something goes wrong.
Mr. Gref, do you have an opinion on that? Is real estate a good investment anywhere at this point?
Мы инвестируем в недвижимость. Это хороший актив. В России цены на недвижимость выросли за последние 7 лет примерно в 6 раз. И недвижимость – это индикатор готовности страны к прямым инвестициям. Если инвестиции в недвижимость окупаемые, значит, страна привлекательна. Недвижимость очень хороший актив для инвестиций, менее волатильный, чем фондовые рынки, чем commodities. И есть только печальный опыт таких стран, в том числе как Япония, когда неправильная макроэкономическая политика правительства приводит к очень длительному спаду на рынке недвижимости. Он очень большую инерцию имеет. Очень долго цена на недвижимость держится высокой, потом она падает и очень долго восстанавливается. И мы видим драматические последствия для девелоперов и банков, которые имеют имущество в виде недвижимости в качестве обеспечения. Но, в принципе, инвестиции в недвижимость в развивающиеся рынки – это один из способов, если регулятивная функция государств построена хорошо, то это один из самых выгодных сегментов во всем мире.
Mr. Kojima, do you want to talk a little bit about the Japan experience and what lessons there are for the emerging markets in real estate?
Yeah. The country by country, real estate business is a bit different. Besides, say, market and also the number of the population, in case of Japan, the population is now decreasing. But the other country is getting richer and, say, the population is increasing, then real estates will be more valuable. Therefore, country by country, we have to see what will be happening next. That is very important. But just like a subprime loan, that is also related to the real estate. Right. Therefore, everybody is now a bit concerned to invest for the real estate throughout the world. That is the current situation. That is my understanding.
Right, thank you. There was a woman in the back, in the center, yes.
Hello, Shirley Pan from China's Taiji magazine. I have a question for Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam. As we know, the southern part of China served as the manufacturing base for the whole world for quite some time. However, recently there is a trend that the manufacturing has started to shift to other countries, including Vietnam, because of the issue that the labor cost has gone up in China. So what's your comment on this? And what kind of differentiation strategy will you pursue? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there's a good sign that the FDI and also domestic investor, of Vietnam have put their money in more in manufacturing sectors. Our industry was based on the agricultures, so we call it agro industries. But now it's the transition of the economy was to the industries, and it's accounted for about 41.8% in 2007. It's continued to be developed. As I mentioned, that it's amongst $20 billion of the foreign direct investment last year. It's about 70% of that was coming to the manufacturing sectors. Now the challenge that we have is that we will be able to meet the demand of the labor force or not. So it requires a lot of training and retraining to our labor force, which is about 50% of our populations, and there's about 20% of the labor force is in the industries. So the transition to the manufacturing sort of industry into the countries, I would suppose that it is a good trend. But the point is that if we could meet that demand and would turn that trend into the efficiencies, It is very much to do with the successful transfer of technology from the FDI to the countries, and also to improve the management capability as well. Now, we understand that the labor costs will not remain, long with the countries. So the point now is that how fast we could improve our labor productivity. And it's to do with the capability, again, with labor force as well.
How do you actually define, though, the competition with China, or is it competition? Is it competition with China in general, competition with southern China, competition specifically with Guangxi, Guangzhou, or is it a relationship that's not a competitive relationship, it's a different kind of relationship?
Well, with China, it is obviously difficult to compete in terms of size. So what we try to do is that we will have to be able to compete in terms of efficiencies. If our workers cannot improve the efficiency, the productivity, which is lower now in comparison with Chinese workers, we will fail to perform and we will fail to achieve our success in the future.
There's a question there.
Question to Mr. Gref. My Russian is good enough to ask in Russian. However, by the respect of the audience, I keep in English. Timur Kamenov of Bulgarian healthcare companies. It was barely mentioned Ukraine, but nobody mentioned eastern part of Europe. Perhaps the early enchantment with Czech Republic and Hungary is gone already. I'm sure you know very well about the latest Southeast European Russian gas and oil supply contracts. How do you see this pool of about 40 million people living in Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, irrespective of membership of European community? Just, do you see any potential there? What's your specific comment, Mr. Gref? Presumably you're the most, let's say, acquainted in details about the region from the panel. Thank you.
Вы знаете, я бы сказал так, что проблему можно разделить на две части. Первое. Какие страны имеют потенциал? Ну, мы выяснили. Для этого необходимо несколько ключевых условий. Первое – внутренние ресурсы для развития. Либо наличие природных ресурсов, либо каких-то развитых секторов экономики, которые позволяют диверсифицировать инвестиции. Второе – это, я согласен с моим японским коллегой, нет примеров высоких темпов экономического роста в странах при падающем населении. Это качество населения, объем населения, и население должно быть растущим. Либо правительство должно очень эффективно решать миграционные проблемы. Это второе условие. И третье условие – это эффективное лидерство со стороны правительства. Даже не важно качество института в текущий момент, важен тренд и понимание правительством необходимости создания качественных институтов и четкое движение в этом направлении. Институты, образование, здравоохранение, борьба с коррупцией. Если эти три условия сходятся, то тогда эта страна, очевидно, будет демонстрировать высокие темпы экономического роста. И если ее население выходит за пределы, там, скажем, 100-150 миллионов человек, это будет один из мировых лидеров. Что касается стран, которые вы назвали, это высокопотенциальные страны с великолепным качеством населения. Чего там не хватает? Не хватает зачастую внутренних ресурсов для развития и внятной стратегии преобразования. Даже, я бы сказал так, последнее является главным. Если в этих странах удастся построить очень эффективную стратегию правительственных институтов, безусловно, все эти страны будут лидерами мирового экономического развития среди развивающихся стран.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Yes, in the front row.
I'm Mike Johnston from the United States. One topic you haven't addressed explicitly is education. It's one thing to have companies come into a country and be able to train workers, to have educable workers. It's another thing to have an educated workforce, especially when one thinks about migrating into services which are more intellectually challenging than manufacturing. Could you comment on educational systems in those countries that you think are doing a particularly good job?
I suppose I should ask you about Nigeria.
Okay, I believe that this is a very important point, and I think anybody that knows Nigeria knows that we have some of the best educated people in the world, and they are all over the place. So the potential for utilizing these people is there. And also we have a large number of educational institutions, a large pool of, like you say, educatable, if there's a word like that, educatable people that can be utilized for this purpose. I think from the perspective of Nigeria, in fact, that's why with our current president, education is in fact among his key 7-point agenda, developing the educational sector. Again, like you said, we're doing it not in fact because anybody says we should do it or because we know it has this great potential, but simply because we believe that education is a very critical aspect of development anyway, and that we must develop the educational capabilities of our population in order to be able to achieve the kinds of economic growth rates that we are projecting for ourselves by the year 2020, which is a double-digit growth rate. That you can't do that effectively without a very highly educated population.
Thank you. Mr. Kojima, how does education fit in when you look at where to put operations or where to put your emphasis?
At the very, very beginning, as I mentioned, the human resources is very, very important. And education is very important. And education makes this human resource quality much higher, and productivity is getting more higher. Therefore, when we invested to some countries, we try to build some so-called education center or training center nearby, and to have more capable, say, productive engineers or people nearby that factory. That is very, very important. And also, as mentioned, and from now on, for instance, in Vietnam, younger generation is very big. Therefore, education of those younger generation makes the country very stronger in future. Therefore, in any case, I fully agree with education is the key issues.
And what specific things is Vietnam doing?
Well, that's actually our challenge at the moment. You see that the economy is growing as 8.5%, and so this year is going to achieve 9%. So it's required a huge amount of labor force, and it's got to be, educated. At the moment, it's only 35% of our labor force is trained, through the professional sort of training schools. So what we do now is that the government are performing a program which is twofold. One is the long-term reform of our education system and vocational also system. The second program is that we're joining with some foreign companies to come in and identify, from the FDI program, the needs for the trainings, and then they set up a training and a program for training and meeting the requirement of the new FDI investors. So by that, we hope that we can bring in the new, training program and meeting the requirement of exactly the foreign investors.
Education, we follow very closely at the OECD. We just released the results of the third PISA study, as you know. We have 57 countries, so we have dozens of developing countries there. And it's education now is like saying motherhood and apple pie. It's a very, very large concept. What are the investors looking at? Well, typically, what's the quality of out of basic, out of middle, in terms of the supply of domestic labor, but also if you're looking at the leaders, the agents of change, the cutting edge, the people who are going to take the government forward, of course, that is the tertiary education, the universities, and maybe also the return of those of the diaspora, as Minister Osman said, who have been abroad and because there weren't enough opportunities in the country, but that are now coming back because opportunities are happening. The other thing is the vocational training, which is not formal education in the sense of getting the lifelong learning type of process, but foreign investors, and the targeted one that Deputy Prime Minister Hai mentioned, that comes, let's say, attached to a particular piece of investment, and that's part of the negotiating skills of the governments who are the hosts, and also of the intelligence and the shrewdness of the investors to make sure that they will not lack in the supply. And there also have to be, of course, flexible labor laws, flexible product laws, an open disposition in general. But certainly when you're talking about these elements of education, of course, they are very important for investors when you're looking medium and long term.
Thank you very much. There's a question on the right side over there.
Thank you. Matthias Benz from the Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung. You talked quite a bit about political stability. Now it strikes me that quite a bit of these countries you mentioned from the BRICs, from the emerging markets, are not exactly democratic. So my question is democracy actually a threat to development? And I would like to ask this question to Mr. Trung, but also Mr. Gurría, possibly Mr. Gref. Thank you.
All right, Deputy Prime Minister Hai, would you want to start with the question about the role of democracy?
Well, I would appreciate the questions, and I suppose that it's one of the issues for the country to be successful is political stability. But one of the other more important thing is that the mood of people, as you were mentioning, and the wish of people to develop. So if the country fails to achieve the democracy, there is no way that the country can achieve the very good moods of people, and again, there's no development can be achieved. So I suppose that it's going hand in hand. It's the leadership of the country that's how to achieve that both. It's to achieve the final, the purpose of the country is to achieve the wealth of the people.
Mr. Gurría.
Yes, democracy is very important, but we're really having a mix here. I mean, I mentioned Costa Rica and Colombia. They're some of the oldest democracies in the world. They're practicing, alternating, and they've been doing that for a long time. In Malaysia, we see clear movement and progress. You also have to, you can't take photos. You have to see a movie, you have to see where it's going. You have to take it in dynamic terms. And I mean, about Vietnam, what can I tell you? The Deputy Prime Minister just told you the great value they attach to democracy itself. In the Middle East, again, you look at Egypt and you see all the transformations that are happening. The day before we had the ministerial on MENA and governance and investment, we had a huge meeting of women entrepreneurs in the Middle East. Now, this is not a formal expression of democracy in the form of an election. This is a very clear expression of democracy in the form of how societies are moving in that part of the world. that means that half of society, which are the women, are now more and more integrated, and obviously it's one of the reasons why the region is growing so fast. So I don't think that anybody will discuss that democracy is a critical ingredient in terms of attracting foreign investment because it has to do with the stability. But what you cannot do is have one single definition of what democracy is, and number two, you have to see the process of democracy in a dynamic terms, moving in the right direction, making the right sorts of progress.
Mr. Gref.
Я бы разделил весь процесс экономического развития на две части, и в зависимости от этого поставил бы демократию как наличие двигателя экономического развития или его отсутствие. Итак, развивающиеся страны. Мы видим, что отсутствие демократии, более того, жесткий режим со стороны правительства позволяет развивающимся странам развиваться темпом 10% в год и выше, тогда как страны развитые, с развитой демократией, таких темпов роста обеспечить не могут. Значит ли это, что такая жесткая власть есть лучший двигатель экономического развития? Конечно, нет. Это говорит о том, что есть две стадии развития экономик стран. Когда страна находится в стадии заимствования технологий и моделей экономического роста у других стран, еще не сложилась политическая культура и политическая система, в таких странах лучше работает вертикальная выстроенная система. Она не дает сбоев, она обеспечивает зачастую такое насильное насаждение современных институтов и стимулирует развитие экономики. Но как только страна переходит в стадию постиндустриального развития, без демократии у нее нет будущего. Инновации, на которые держится постиндустриальная экономика и постиндустриальная конкуренция, не могут инициироваться правительством и чиновниками, состоящими во главе иерархии. В процесс экономического развития должны быть включены миллионы субъектов. Должен быть включен обмен свободомыслия, обмен информацией, свобода слова. И в этом случае наличие демократии для эффективного экономического развития является обязательным. И, по-моему, на примере целого ряда стран мы видим именно такой трансформационный путь. Если страна превышает производство ВВП примерно 20-25 тысяч долларов на человека, у нее нет другого пути к развитию, кроме как создания демократических основ политической жизни и экономической тоже. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. This has been a fascinating... Sorry? Maybe one final question here.
Thank you very much. Chukuma Saluda from Nigeria. It's been going on so well with a tone of optimism, and it seems that this is going to last forever. That's the impression one gets. We haven't heard about the potential threats to the BRICs and these emerging economies. In terms of, for example, the clear and glaring absence of a global coordination mechanism. Today we see the way China is going. $1.5 trillion in terms of reserves, growing current account surplus, the US in deficit. There is a threat of reverse protectionism among the OECD economies, and so on. The G13 or G8 is ineffective, it's a talk shop. The IMF, WTO, ineffective. Doha Round is dead. So, isn't there a threat to continuing global prosperity in a world without a sound governance infrastructure?
That's a fantastic question to end the session on. So why don't we start first with the OECD view?
It is a fantastic question, and I think we have a lot of homework to do. You're basically talking about the architecture of the governance of the world. We had a discussion with Angela Merkel on the 19th of December, the heads of 5 international institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, WTO, ILO, and the OECD. And we were talking about this precisely. And we agreed that, number one, the G8 have to integrate the G5, as I mentioned before, as soon as possible, and that the sooner the better, but also that the G8 and the G5 had to cooperate better precisely to solve these imbalances, these asymmetries, these problems that you're looking at. Otherwise, it's going to affect them all. That international institutions should cooperate better, avoid duplication, avoid competition, add the resources to put out messages that are very loud, that are formidable in terms of their impact and their power, and that governments will then not be able to ignore them. And there are other threats too, because, for example, the threat of commodity oscillations, the wisdom that some countries are showing today of keeping their money for the next generation or for the next to the next generation at least part of the windfall is fairly new, I have to say. Not everybody is practicing in the same way. We can't do Doha. Again, whether Pascal Ami is around in the building or not, if we can't do Doha, Doha is the low-hanging fruit. If we can't do Doha, how are we going to do poverty? How are we going to do water? How are we going to do energy, climate change? How are we going to face these enormous global challenges? We can't do Doha, you know, because we can't reduce a few billion of subsidies in one place and a few points of protection in the other place. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a sobering message that you leave us with, that there's a lot of homework to do on the global governance issue.
There's a lot of work to do. It's been a wonderful panel. I thank you all for your participation, and I look forward to coming back to discussing the triumph of the emerging markets or the tragedy of failed promise. Please leave by this door when you go. Thank you all very much.